welcome to this week's Two Men in the Middle. This is where two guys from the middle of the country talk about politics and current events. I'm Craig Huey.
I'm Brandon Kinnig.
How was your fourth, Brandon?
My fourth was great.
Yeah.
It was quiet. It was nice. Ended up going to Omaha for the weekend, so that was fun. Didn't have to deal with airports though, which was always a good thing on a holiday.
Omaha's such an easy drive from KC.
Oh yeah, it's like 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Although it was like actually driving through like the Everglades though, because of the flooding.
Yeah,
I mean,
true.
I mean, massive flooding that still comes up almost to the roadway, and there were some places where, as far as you could see, it was all water. And I mean, I saw stop signs underwater. I mean, it was
really,
still.
I thought a lot of that had subsided from its peak about a month-ish ago, but
a lot of it hasn't. I mean, there's whole stretches where, I mean, you see these towns that are still underwater. I mean, it's just incredible that there's that much left. I don't think I've ever seen it that flooded.
And isn't the issue that the terrain is so flat that when the water gets out of the bank of the river through upper Missouri and Nebraska and Iowa and those areas, there's just no place for it to go.
Oh, absolutely.
It just lays
the terrain
in the
is
field
flat and
it
it's
evaporates.
low lying because, I mean, you're talking about, several feet below the roadway. So it's bound to happen. And this happens anytime there's flooding, especially after this spring. We had so much rainfall. And so it hasn't dissipated at all. I mean, they did a good job of, clearing the roads and making sure they could get I-29 back open. But, I mean, outside of I-29, there are many exits that you cannot take because of the
you can't get
flooding.
off the road.
Yeah.
I had a pretty good fourth. It was quiet. Props to the neighborhood. They shut everything down by like 11 o'clock.
Oh, wow.
Which is really rare.
Yeah.
I think we talk about the changing demographics in the country, the changing demographics in our neighborhood. You start realizing there's just not a lot of kids left. And kids want fireworks, their parents buy them, they end up shooting them off. So it's just another benefit to having older kids that move on. Your neighborhood gets quieter on the 4th, and you have to worry about so many things exploding till all hours of the night, which is always good.
I'm sure that's a welcome development, yeah.
And you said you really didn't catch a lot of President Trump's salute to America or salute to freedom or 4th of July celebration or whatever he talked about it.
From his speech and read about it after the fact.
Yeah.
I did not see it in real time. I did catch parts of the celebration in New York, so I got to see that.
Yeah.
I think that was on NBC. But no, it had a lot of viewers. It received, I think, pretty substantial coverage.
The only network that covered it was Fox Live. Everybody else refused to do it because they thought it would just be a big political campaign. I watched it. It wasn't as I listened to it in the car. Listening to a Trump speech is way worse than watching it. Just getting the audio is difficult.
I can imagine, yeah.
But it wasn't his campaign.
It wasn't
as we thought.
I mean,
he showed some
I think
restraint.
we've come to expect the worst, now, and so just if we get a little bit less than that, we're happy.
And again, if the president wants to do that on the 4th of July, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I didn't understand the tanks and stuff, but hey, military stuff is cool sometimes. So if you want to... I think people made it out and expected the worst, and they certainly should because of
just
Trump's
based
past
on past behavior. Yeah,
the Blue Angels flyover was cool.
That was cool.
But of course, we couldn't get out of talking about this speech without the flub of in 1776. Apparently, we took airports from the British during the Revolutionary War, and that was the key to our victory.
Yeah, gosh, being able to, take over those airports. I mean, we just have never given George Washington his due. I mean,
So apparently Mick Jagger at a concert said, if we only could have held the airports, maybe things would have been a bit different for the British in that war as a jab. My only point with this is even this little podcast that we do for an hour a week. If I listen to the podcast multiple times during the week, I say stupid stuff all the time, or I mispronounce, or I say stuff. My only point is, remember when it was such a travesty that Obama couldn't talk without a teleprompter? And it showed some sort of weakness in his character. Maybe his
opponent seized on that to extrapolate that into something much more. And you're right, but I think, like you said, I think we've become immune to what Trump does and his follies and foibles. I mean, he's clearly has little to no grasp of history. He doesn't have that, and we have become, just immune to it. I mean, we expect it and we don't think otherwise. And I don't know what that means about us, but that we just don't care. I mean, as a society.
That's the interesting point. Trump is Trump, and we know who it is. What does it say about us when so many of these things have happened and we just kind of let them go and don't even look at them anymore?
Right.
And Trump off teleprompter is always that's not his natural state.
No.
When he can't be freewheeling and kind of off the cuff, he loses some of the effectiveness in his presentation.
Yeah, and he becomes more incoherent. The teleprompter is the only thing that keeps him coherent.
Well, yeah, the teleprompter does have a tendency to keep him on pace, but
when he speaks off a teleprompter too, it doesn't sound like him. You can tell it's not genuine.
His pace,
he doesn't
his
sound
diction,
authentic.
It's
right.
completely different. Obama got better off a teleprompter. Trump takes a nosedive
many presidents
when he is off of that. So one of the big things that happened during the week that we were off, the Women's World Cup wrapped up.
Yes.
And I'm a huge soccer fan. Having two kids that have played club soccer and been competitive their entire lives, we grew up with the sport and we grew up around soccer. And big fan of women's soccer. Women's soccer is one of the few games that, for me, and I'll get in trouble for this, but I'll say it anyway, that you can have equal enjoyment watching women play the game as you can men. Not going to pick on the WNBA, but watching women's basketball is not the same as watching men play basketball. It's a totally different game.
Right.
One of my favorite things to do is find a little SEC college softball tournament on ESPN like 9 during the weekend and watch that. But watching softball isn't the same as watching baseball.
And I mean, this team is really good. I mean, they are talented. They've proven that. And it was really exciting to watch them continue to have this success game after game after game. And I noticed just anecdotally, more people in my circle and people that I talk with were tuning in and paying attention. People that haven't followed women's soccer before really became invested in this. And so it was phenomenal to see this win, to see the ticker tape parade for them in New York City when they came back home. And I think it speaks a lot to, especially to a whole generation of young girls, that they have, these players they can look up to and role models, which, they don't have as many of, in athletics and in sports as men do and little boys do. So there's a lot of positives that I think come out of this.
This was a very American team.
Yes.
They were brash. They were bold. They were favored to win. They embraced being the favorite.
They did.
They didn't mind showing off a little bit.
And it was interesting. There was some criticism of, that they were too confident or showed off too much. And I'm like, come on, like equal standards, guys. I mean, guys do that and people don't say anything.
Obviously, you've never watched men's international
Apparently
soccer.
not, yeah. The people that were criticizing. Because that's what you expect. Yeah, give them a break. Cut them some slack. This is a big win. They should be able to,
absolutely,
blow off steam, show off, be happy about it, be confident,
When your main critic is Piers Morgan calling you smug, I think you're still on pretty solid ground.
Yeah, I agree.
But the thing that I found interesting is how the whole equal pay thing took off. And how after they won, I went to my Twitter feed and it was just nonstop. Equal pay in the World Cup, equal pay for the women. The women win, the men don't. That will use with some type of leverage or some type of justification that they needed to get equal prize money. And anybody that challenged that in any way, whatever argument you wanted to bring to the table, immediately you weren't judged as non-sufficiently woke, and you got ridiculed, made fun of, and your idea was shot down.
It immediately became a lightning rod issue for so many, yeah.
And this was for me, this was kind of one of those metaphors of, this is a complicated issue. There's multiple layers to it. There are good answers for this. And there's a logical discussion that we can have to figure out how do we elevate the women's game to pay them more. But simply shouting equal pay and that FIFA is unfair and the World Cup is unfair, that doesn't really pass muster for what we need to have in that conversation.
No, it doesn't move the conversation forward to get to a point where you can, have agreement and bring all the parties together to increase pay. I do think that we're at a time now, if you look at it from a free market perspective, especially if you look at this season, the last couple of games, clearly the audience is there. They have surpassed that. So the money will be there now to justify that in terms of revenues. The audience, the viewership is there now, but you can't say that has been the case the entire time. No. So I think it's a little bit difficult to go way back and make that argument, because that all of those factors haven't been in play as they are now.
And the men's tournament's hundreds of years old. It's been the most popular sport in the world for hundreds of years. The first tournament, I believe, was 95 for women.
Yeah, I think so. Again, yeah,
you're talking about something 25 years old against a much more established event. What got me, and again, and I don't want to go fully down the rabbit hole with this, but the men's World Cup tournament brings in $6 billion in revenue. The women's World Cup's about 170-ish million, just on market.
Right.
Just on size of market dictates pay. The size of the tournament, the revenue the tournament takes in, dictates how much money is paid out. In reality, the women made more as a percentage of the payout for the Women's World Cup than the men do from theirs. The men make about 7%. The women's, it's about 11%. The problem is $6 billion in revenue versus $170 million. That explains more of the difference in pay than anything.
Right. It's a significant difference, and it's easy to lose sight of the fact that this is a different environment than like colleagues that work at the same company under the same brand that are, same revenue pot. Two completely different models, two completely different revenue streams. So, it's I think that argument is a little bit simplistic to say equal pay when you're not accounting for all these other variables.
And it's not to say they don't have legitimate areas of complaint. And their complaints with U.S. soccer, I think, are very legit. For example, a man, when he makes the World Cup team, I think they get a bonus of $37,000. The women get $4,500. That's certainly something that you can say, listen, that needs to be justified. Why is it not the same payout for both people making the same level of team? I think they've got a real argument there.
Right. And the men's soccer team's record has been so poor in recent years, too. And so you would think there should be salary adjustments for that as well.
But there's things too, that sports is littered with payment not equaling performance.
Yeah.
It's a great idea that we think should happen, but in the end, sometimes, most of the time, those two things have nothing to do with each other.
Just as it is in many sectors of society.
That's right.
So yeah.
The market dictates what somebody's worth. Megan Rapinoe, I thought she's become a lightning rod because she is the one who has been got into the fight with Trump. She kneeled during the national anthem. This has been her issue. But if you listen to what her solutions are to resolve this problem, you mentioned it. They're all free market solutions. When Maddow asked her, how do we solve this problem? She said very simply, go to a women's pro game. Buy a season ticket. Tell your friends to buy one. Take them with them. Buy our shirts. Buy our jerseys. She wasn't proposing that some government hand needs to come down and level this playing field.
Yeah.
I think she understands that the key to this is they need to grow the women's game. And that's where they have another legitimate complaint with FIFA and with U.S. soccer. For some reason, during the Women's World Cup final, there were also 2 Gold Cup men's FIFA finals that day too.
Oh, same day.
Gold Cup is, again, I know some soccer, but I'm out of my depth a little bit here. Gold Cup is like a smaller version of the Men's World Cup. It's played all around the world. So instead of FIFA showcasing the women singularly that day and that final, they scheduled 2 men's events with it too. That's ridiculous.
That's ridiculous. Absolutely.
The U.S. soccer, when they come back and have their victory tour, which again, one of the ways you make money is after you win the tournament, you come back. I think they play 6 or 8 matches against international and other clubs here in the United States. They make money for that. The day that they come back, I believe, for their first Champions Tour game, which I think is against Ireland, there are 6 other women's pro games scheduled that day. Why? And I think these are things that are legitimate. These are things that show, and I think Rapinoe said it best, a little bit of disrespect towards the women in their game.
Right.
That if you were going to concentrate on growing the game, that's the area to focus on.
Disrespect and a lack of support, too. Yeah. I think that's been implied many times as they haven't had that support from FIFA that they should have.
And make it a 32-country tournament. There's only 24 countries in this tournament. 32 more countries, you get more players, you get more ticket sales, you get more TV revenue. Everybody's boat rises as the tournament goes.
Absolutely. And I think, Megan is savvy. I mean, she realizes this is a moment to seize upon.
Yeah.
All eyes are on women's soccer and what they've been able to accomplish. And so take advantage of that, get your friends and family to show up, sustain that and be able to demonstrate that, hey, we have a very viable product here in the marketplace. We have momentum. We have sales that are increasing. There is no reason at this point to not have the support, the respect, and a model in place to get salaries increased. So I think that's the way to do it, and she's zeroed in on that.
Yeah. And if I'm baseball, I am afraid of soccer in the next 20 years.
Yeah.
You can watch a soccer game end to end in 2 hours and 15 minutes. There's constant action. It's a great sport to watch live. There's limited TV as baseball.
You don't have all these pauses and timeouts. And
baseball's in trouble right now searching for its audience.
Yeah.
I know soccer's always said it's going to get popular. It's going to get popular. I think that time is tipped in sports that traditionally, like baseball, that have had wide viewerships and wide generational followings. They're going to struggle against.
Well, and I love baseball, but it's slow and it's difficult
to
watch and stay dialed in for an entire game. It is.
So let's pivot to Trump now and the Supreme Court and the census question, where there was a brief moment, I think around maybe Monday, Tuesday of this week, where I thought he's actually going to do it. He's going to defy the Supreme Court. He is going to issue an executive order or an executive action, and he is going to try to pull an end around the Supreme Court decision to get that question on the census.
Well, he caught everybody off guard. I mean, the Commerce Department, Justice Department, his own cabinet with his decision to
multiple times.
Right. Well, but especially with saying that, floating the idea of an executive order, because at this point, that came right after officials in his administration had basically said that the fight is over. It's going to be printed without the question, and so then they had to scramble because he literally told his attorneys to find a case, to find a scenario to where they could justify this, find a way. And if you watch the court proceedings, they'd asked for extra time. They'd asked to switch out attorneys. They were denied that. And that path was difficult, if not impossible.
Yeah.
Just based on, the reason that was rejected in the first place, that they did not have solid reasoning for including that, and that their reasoning was inaccurate based on the argument that they were making. Yeah. So, I mean, they were really stuck from that standpoint, and time was working against them. I mean, the administration themselves had said that they needed a fast-tracked Supreme Court decision now to be able to have ballots printed in October.
Which they weren't going to get.
Right. And so if this was drawn out, then ballots would it be, or I keep saying ballots, surveys, would it be printed until, later in the year, and they would be able to start the census on time. So, I mean, the way the census works, it's like clockwork. They have to hire, tens of thousands of temporary workers to facilitate and execute the census and to go door to door. So there is limited time to start the process, and time worked against him. And I think it was a rare case where the president actually had to backtrack.
So here's one way to think of this: is it worth getting that question on the census more than is that more important than not violating a Supreme Court order? I said that horribly. Let me try this again. So there's two ways you can look at that. This is, what is the value to the president of this question on the census, balanced against going down in
defying
history
the Supreme Court
as a president who picked a fight and defied a Supreme Court order. Did one of those just tip, or did something tip in Trump's orbit that he suddenly realized you do not want to pick this fight with the Supreme Court?
I think that didn't want to pick the fight, but I also thought that he didn't want to be ruled against a second time and have the Supreme Court again come out against him. He doesn't like losing. He hates to lose. And so this was a scenario where, it's lose once versus lose twice, and try to explain it away. If he loses once and he, creates an alternative, which, he attempted to do, it allows him to save some face. And so I think that's how he was looking at it. I also think that from his standpoint, he was very upfront about this, that he sees this as imperative for drawing congressional districts.
Yeah.
He saw it in that lens, which I thought was kind of interesting that he didn't even dance around that. He just came out and said it. He's like, we have to have it so that we can, be able to draw congressional districts that are favorable for the Republicans. I mean, it just...
He doesn't try to hide it.
He doesn't hide it. So, so that was fascinating. So I think he did have a vested interest in this because he wants to regain control of the House. He wants Republicans to hold the Senate. He knows how the census impacts allocation of electoral votes and how that's going to impact him. But I think at the end of the day, this would turn out to be another distraction he could afford, and he knew he couldn't win at the end. He saw the writing on the wall. He could not win this.
Yeah. As a Democrat and as somebody of my age, I am appalled that the President of the United States would consider invalidating a Supreme Court ruling that he disagreed with for anything.
Yeah.
Help me, and you have to answer this question as a Republican. And I know this is, as a Trump Republican, I guess maybe would be a more clearly way to say
I have
that.
To put that hat on.
How possibly could the value of winning this fight outweigh the damage of once again attacking a governmental norm, a norm of how this country's operated for hundreds of years? And I don't understand the basis issue with this, but what is the value? What could possibly be more reward for taking the risk of being the president, one of the presidents that denied a Supreme Court decision?
Well, a short-term gain, long-term damage. We know that the demographic trends are against Trump and against his brand, what he's turned the Republican Party into long-term. There's no argument against that. And knowing that that's coming down, it's about trying to achieve every short-term victory that can be attained right now, knowing that demographically they're not going to have this power for very long. So there's that element of it. Also, it's an element, particularly when it comes to Trump, and it's those that have bought into, hitched their wagons to him, that they don't, care how this impacts the reputation of these institutions, whether we're talking about the Justice Department or whether we're talking about the Supreme Court, whether we're talking about the legislative branch. Time and time again, Trump sees those institutions as a means to an end. He does not care about, how norms are violated or separation of powers or the historical relevance of, moving away from, what has been established precedent over, 2 centuries. He sees it as this is a means to an end. I want to accomplish this, and I'm going to do it this way. Because again, he doesn't differentiate between the presidency and business. He operates the same in both spheres of influence, basically. And so I think that because his approach has not changed and he views this as a business decision, I think what was telling, and we'll probably get into this later, so I'm probably jumping the gun, but when he appeared with Acosta today at the press conference with Acosta's resignation, he was speaking about Acosta's decision on his prosecution, which has been hammered now, with how he handled that and the sweetheart deal that he gave to Epstein. He talked about that as a negotiation, that people didn't like the way he negotiated that, as if it's just a transactional business decision. Yeah, but again, that's the frame that Trump speaks in when it comes to even what happens in government or what happens in the court of law. He sees everything as transactional, everything as a business decision or negotiation, and that and that it should all be approached the same, despite the fact that we have safeguards in place when it comes to executive authority, when it comes to the law. So I think that plays into how he thinks. I think that plays into how his supporters address this. But if you ask them one-on-one, I guarantee you this, because I've talked to a handful of people, they see the writing on the wall. They know that The tide is turning. That long-term trends are against them. It's what can we get done now with the limited time we have.
Well, that was a good explanation, but it's also one of those things that we have lobbed at Republicans for years. That the only way you win is you cheat. You jerry rig, you depress the vote, pick any number of techniques that you use to do that. Doesn't this in some way validate some of that criticism that Trump did just come out and say, listen, we've got to be able to get this question on because we have got to write congressional districts the way that meet our needs, or we know we're not going to win. In some ways, his willingness to even brush up against this topic in the way that he did is a little bit of fuel for my side to say, hey, we've all known this, we've all talked about it, we've all suspected it. Here's them just showing their hand.
I mean, I think that's a stretch. I think there may have been there obviously are elements of that have already existed, but we also haven't had past Republican presidents who have fought and attempted to do this as Trump has. So that's a key difference. And I think that depending on state by state, you've had Republicans that have, attempted to suppress the vote at different times. In other states, you've had Republicans who haven't. It's a broad argument to make. I think there's probably more instances of where you've seen that happen on the Republican side, but it's not, it's not global in that you can say that every Republican has attempted to do that. But I think especially with this environment we're in right now, and knowing Trump knows, I think in his heart of hearts, he knows how he was elected. It wasn't this overwhelming mandate, and that he can't afford for that coalition to crack at all, for that to rupture. I mean, if he loses, skims off 5 to 10% of the voters, he's done.
Yeah,
he's done.
He can't lose anybody.
And so, I think that, and those around him are probably even more adjusted to that reality than he is. And so it's, whatever damage we do in the interim, it has to happen just so we can make enough systemic changes to halt the coming demographic changes that are the pipeline. We know they're going to happen, but if we can, hold them off for, 10 to 20 years rather than 5 to 10 years, it will be worth it.
It feels like you're trying to buy yourself time to reset. You can't do it now in the Trump era. It's like, hey, we need to buy some time in order to flush this out of it when it's done, redefine who we are, and still have a fighting chance of being able to win the House and be able, because really this is where this is going to
there is a theory
most.
that it's almost like, for lack of a better metaphor, it's almost like Cinderella, the clock strikes midnight, everything goes back to where it was.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk that that's what's going to happen when the Trump era is over. The Republicans will...
don't think that... I don't know.
You don't think that's going to happen?
No.
I don't buy into that either, but there's some talk that many of these Republicans who have sold their souls, will revert back and then claim plausible deniability that I didn't know what was going on. I totally this is Trump isn't who I thought he was.
Paul Ryan tried to try that this week.
He did, yeah.
That didn't work out very well for him.
No, it did not. It resulted in Trump hammering him as well. By the way, that book is really interesting. I'm going to want to read that when that book is out.
I would never read that book, and Paul Ryan deserves whatever he gets. Again, what in typical Paul Ryan fashion, he was a giant wuss during when it was actually
he didn't
going
stand
down.
up.
He did nothing. When it could have mattered, he did nothing. And then a year
But wait
and
a second,
later,
you don't want to read this book? Do you know how many
No.
revelations are supposed to be? This isn't a book. This is by Paul Ryan. You know that, right?
No, I did not know
No,
that.
this is by an independent author, a journalist, who it's a memoir where he talked to all of these Republicans in Trump's orbit. So it's supposed to have all of these revelations. This is not.
I misjudged.
Yeah,
what
this isn't
book
like
was.
Ryan's,
Okay.
memoirs. No.
This is my fault.
You will want to
because
read this book.
I'm taking my story from Twitter here.
Okay.
And usually this is where you get wrong.
Yeah.
I thought this was a book by Paul Ryan.
No, he's
This
just
is
quoted in the book because his journalist
gotcha.
interviewed all of these,
which makes him
characters.
even more of a puss because now he's shielding himself in. Well, I was along with 50 other people that got interviewed. They all said bad things. I said too. Nothing sums up more than Paul Ryan than this right here.
Right.
And why I am so glad he's in Wisconsin and he could just stay in Wisconsin.
And that he's done. Yeah, his political career is over. So
he will never see the light of day again.
He's not coming back.
On the census question, to be fair, this question has been on the census before. I think the last time it was on the census was in the 1950s.
50s, I believe.
So it's not completely foreign.
And other countries do include that type of question on their census as well.
This is a suggestion from the UN that you count citizens along with your overall population. If it were any president other than Trump, we wouldn't be having this problem. But in the Trump era,
there's a lack of trust in terms of how it will be utilized and weaponized, basically. And I think there's every logical fear that it would be weaponized in many ways against the minority party in government.
And there's also a survey that's done as well that is a companion product to the census that does ask this question.
Yes.
So it's not as if we are in no way trying to ascertain the amount of people who are citizens in this country. So
right.
I think, again, I read some comments by Hugh Hewitt today. Hugh Hewitt, to me, is one of the most interesting conservatives, and he's also one of the most dangerous conservatives because Hugh Hewitt has one of his go forward strategies is he's the first one to take some things that start a little fringe. Hugh Hewitt is the gateway drug to normalizing sometimes some alt-right behavior. And his assessment was this is really going to be devastating for 50% of Trump's base. And I just couldn't understand that.
I haven't heard or seen that yet.
Yeah.
So I find that questionable.
If you're a hardcore Trump supporter, is this
the hill that you die on?
What shakes your?
Yeah.
I just can't imagine that. Maybe I'm wrong because I'm not connecting very well with the hardcore.
If
Trump
it would be
supporters
anything, and I think there's relatively few things that could shake their faith and blind loyalty to Trump. But if it were anything, I think it would be Trump giving up the fight to build the wall. If he just decided, hey, I'm scrapping this, fought as much as we could, we need to move beyond the wall. But that would be the one issue.
The wall's not being built. It's not being built in any way.
But again, that doesn't matter. It's the idea of it, and he propels that. And Trump, misleads about that constantly. But I don't think his people care. As long as they feel that he's fighting for him on that, that's all that matters. If he packed his bags and said, this isn't a fight that I want to continue. We're done. Let's move on. I think they'd be upset. They don't care if it actually gets built. They care that he's fighting for it.
Yeah. Every couple months he tweets a picture of some random thing that looks like it's in the desert, could be on the border with Mexico, and says 500 more miles of wall up. As long as they get that, you think that's enough to kind of appease
Or there was
crowd.
existing fencing that they were replacing, and he said, hey, we have new wall, and portrayed that as like additional wall when that wasn't. It was replacement to existing fencing. So he has a tendency to do that. But the point is that they want to know and feel like he's fighting for their priorities, which many of them, their priority is the wall. And so
we don't care if you're winning. We don't care if you're destroying. We're leaving a wake of destruction in your path. It's just that you are fighting. Yeah. That's what's important.
They want someone who's a fighter, who's going to stick up at the end of the day. And because there isn't, if you get in a debate, they're not going to point to specific successes or achievements. It's the fact that, he's taken it to the other side, that he's,
it's feeling over facts.
Right. The emotion.
Talking about entirely. A group of political people that are fighting, the Democrats, they seem to be having a little in-house squabble of their own. This is mostly in the House.
And it's mostly the same four that we have talked about on this podcast over and over again.
Nancy Pelosi.
And there's a tendency here, and I feel for Speaker Pelosi on this, because these particular members of Congress have a habit of going to Twitter and airing out their grievances publicly. And Nancy is old school. That's not something she's used to. She's used to back room, you yell it out, come to an agreement and then move on. But it's not meant to be aired out publicly.
Well, and I'll go you one farther. If you're a freshman, you don't say anything.
No. You don't have the seniority yet.
Here are the talking points that we'll tell you.
Right.
You will do it this way, and that's what it is. So there's the 4 freshman congresswomen, Rashid Tlaib, Omar, AOC. Who's the 4th one?
From Massachusetts. Yeah. I'm blanking out the moment.
We'll think of her at some point. They have been bickering with Pelosi on and off about impeachment. They're not happy that she is not going to move impeachment forward. Pelosi has taken some shots at them about the Green Deal and kind of the lack of structure and the lack of ability to move that forward. And AOC this week basically came out and said the reason that Pelosi has the problem she has with the four of us is because we're women of color.
Right. And so just to back up a bit for context on this. So Pelosi had given an interview where she was asked to discuss the disagreement among the House Democratic caucus on the border funding bill, the last bill that passed, which was a compromise bill.
And those four were the only four who didn't vote for it.
Right. They were the only four who did not vote for it. And, she was asked for her opinion because they were very adamant and very vocal against it. They were not supportive because of funding them with to ICE and for continued immigration enforcement. And Pelosi brought up, well, they are for, they may have their, I think she referred to it as Twitter or whatever, but at the end of the day, they were for votes, and clearly the rest of the caucus wasn't with them. And so that is what triggered AOC's comment, a couple of comments, but the one that received the most attention was this idea that somehow they were targeted because they happen to be women of color.
Well, it's not some idea. She said it.
Yes. She did say it.
She basically said, I guess it's because we're women of color.
Which is crazy to accuse your own speaker, your own leader, of that. And again, you're a freshman. And it just, and this is, I mean, it's ridiculous on many levels, but the fact is Nancy Pelosi has been in Washington a long time.
Absolutely.
Nobody has ever lobbied that type of accusation against her before.
No. And I think that a few things on this, when you said Pelosi sees them as 4 votes, that's how Nancy, this is not the Freedom Caucus.
Yeah.
This isn't a group of 30 or 40 that vote as a block who literally could say, we are going to sway when the Republicans were in power. You have to have us. You're going nowhere without us. If we go a different direction or we decide to dissent, you're not going to get anything done.
Right.
Nancy Pelosi doesn't see this as a young, progressive, next wave generational movement.
No,
she sees this as 4 votes.
If you look at the 40 seats that were pickups in November,
they're all suburban seats.
Seats, and most of those ended up joining the centrist caucus, which I think is the New Democrats, which kind of succeeded the Blue Dogs, and they have a much larger membership than the Progressive Caucus does in the House, and that's just a fact.
And Nancy Pelosi has been around enough to know she sees you as your vote and how many votes you can generate or rally to your cause.
Right.
Right now, these 4 are not putting any type of caucus together. They're not rallying people to them. If anything, they're alienating themselves.
And you have to remember, too, there was a closed-door meeting earlier in the year where, AOC, again, a freshman, basically threatened her moderate colleagues with finding primary challengers against them.
That pissed Pelosi off big time.
Because, again, it's like, you're a freshman. You've been, in the House all of a New York minute, and here you are making, threats against your colleagues because they won't vote with you. And it also shows a fundamental lack of understanding of how the majority was formed and what you need to do to keep the majority. Because if you really want to get down to it, AOC won by about 15,000 votes. That's how much she beat Crowley in the primary and basically had that seat given to her from that day forward.
Whoever wins that primary, that's one of the bluest districts in the country.
Right.
I think, too, this is partly generational.
Yeah.
Let's not forget, Pelosi's 78 years old or 79. She's old. AOC is 29. These gals are all in their early to mid 30s. Part of this is a generational thing that there is no more expectation that you come in at the ground floor and you work your way up.
Right.
The generation now is I'm going to come in the middle of the pack or the high end of the pack, and me simply being here is what gets me that position. There is no more you start at the bottom and you earn your way up. And I think Trump's election accelerated that.
Yes.
Hey, if that jackass could go from hosting The Apprentice to being the president of the United States, why can't I go from bartender to congresswoman to thought leader of the Democratic Party?
See, there you go. That's another example of a norm that's been obliterated.
Smashed. Yeah. Just completely gone. And I think this is where this was compounded by AOC's chief of staff, who I'm going to get this quote wrong, but he basically said that moderate Democrats in the House were no different than 1960s blue dog House members who were segregationist and racist in the 1960s.
It's insane.
And she has gotten pounded
crazy
because of that,
as she should, absolutely,
as she should.
And again, it's another example of how far left Democrats can be pulled, because when this is out there publicly, you have segments of the American people who say, "Oh, wow, that's crazy. Like, do I want to be attached to that?" And there's many people. And again, you talk about snatching victory from the jaws of defeat.
Yeah.
Did I just say that wrong?
Defeat.
I always do that. Defeat from the jaws of victory. This is how that's done, because when you have this inter-party warfare that's happening publicly, and the back and forth, and you have a case of where ridiculous statements are made to make Democrats who are already left of center feel like they're not even in the party. You have Americans who are not pro-Trump, who are unhappy with things going on, but they see that and they're like, "Oh, do I want to be associated with that?"
And the vast majority of the Democratic Party is not the progressive Twitter
not at all.
crowd.
No,
we are moderates, kind of like myself. We have a progressive issue or two that we'd like to see us push farther on, but basically we want to be centrist and we want to get things done. We want to move things forward.
The progressive wing of the party is very small. They're just much more vocal, and so they tend to have outsized impact, and they tend to be seen as much larger than they are.
I'm going to aim this at all millennials and people under 30 who generally, as I get older, I despise more and more every day. One of the great things that age teaches you is that when somebody is making a mistake, you let them make it.
Yes.
You don't help out your opponent by stopping their mistake or taking attention from them by being more grotesque than your opponent. Right now, the Republicans, to a lot of Americans, are historically gross. We are helping you in infinite ways by showing we are equally inept and equally gross in different ways than the Republican Party.
Well, you're deflecting the attention from the Republicans in a bad way. That's exactly what's happening.
A lot of this race for 2020 might come down to what party can shut up the fastest.
Yeah.
What party can say, you know what, just look over there at those folks. We're just not going to we're not going to contribute to this kind of sideshow, and we want you to focus on their opponent.
And this is the danger, because in the Democratic presidential race, many of the candidates right now are courting AOC in hopes of an endorsement. There's a few that are not. Obviously, Joe Biden is notable because he's not under any circumstance.
I will go on record right now. If he courts AOC's endorsement, I will not vote for Joe Biden.
There you go.
I mean,
you've heard it here.
Come on.
Yeah. I don't see that happening. But the point is, I think these Democratic candidates who are doing that are doing themselves a disservice beyond the primary, because they're not looking beyond the primary and how that's going to be viewed, and the fact that they are going to have to walk a lot of this back and try to appeal to a much more centrist electorate than they are in the primary. And it's that age-old question, but if it's ever more vital, it is now, just based on who they're up against and the fact that we have a very polarizing election ahead of us, and they cannot afford to give up again, blue collar Democratic voters that voted for Trump in 2016.
This is about the blue wall.
Yeah.
We're going to win New York. We're going to win California. This is about, can we rebuild Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania?
Right.
That's what this is about. AOC helps us in no way in that effort.
No.
We could win the popular vote by 5 million votes and lose the White House.
Yes.
If we do that, we have no one to blame but ourselves.
Exactly. And I think the question they should ask is, you may feel comfortable courting AOC now, but would you feel comfortable with having her on the campaign trail for you in the general and next fall, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan? And I think the answer is no. Of course not.
They're
not going to have
way.
her out there.
You're not going to throw her out there.
That's a type of long-term thinking that they need to be doing right now.
And AOC is in a weird spot. She doesn't have enough legislative experience.
She's too new, too green.
That she can be a Elizabeth Warren type policy wonk.
Yeah.
I have a plan for that. I have thought this out. How about trying this? She doesn't have the experience or the intellectual experience as well to be a thought leader.
No.
And I think my evidence for this was her rollout of the
new Green Deal.
Absolutely.
Because it lacks substance. It was all of these lofty goals without any substance, behind them, any policy that you could tie to it. So it was, kind of a flub.
And that's where Reagan was a master. I don't care about details. You didn't come here to learn details from me.
Yeah.
Some egghead in my administration will tell you that later. If you want to get fired up about the idea, if you want to feel good about America and that we can do this and we can be a leader, that's where you want to tack to. AOC had an opportunity to put herself out there in that space. And instead, she chose to do, I won't even begin to try to decipher what was in her mind when she did the Green New Deal thing. Because it was just mind salad crap that is on par with anything Trump has done in that era. I just don't understand what you were going for.
Well, there's nothing actionable there. And it's not realistic. And so I think it died and pretty much will, not be revived.
But we need a climate kind of champion. We need that person who wants to be a advocate, a loud advocate for climate change.
You do, but you need somebody who can outline the concrete steps that need to be taken on local and the federal level and be able to create a plan where you start small and work your way up, because you're not going to be able to, cut carbon emissions by 30% tomorrow. You're not going to be able to implement cap and trade tomorrow. You're not going to be able to, just employ, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of Americans working in green jobs tomorrow, which she tied green jobs to this. There was way too much. There is a lot that you can do short term, and there are a lot of specific goals that can be realized. I mean, heck, you just start with, if you're running for president, the Paris Climate Accord. I mean, the fact that we withdrew from that is could be a number one goal.
And where she really gets off the mark is a person of experience knows that's a team of people.
Yes.
That's not you. You can't talk to the fellas in Detroit about how the auto industry can contribute.
You need to surround yourself with people who can talk to them
and get new tech on board. Experience teaches you that you can be the directional, inspirational, we're going in this directional leader, but you can't cover all bases.
Well, that's been her failing so far, as she's acted as a team of one. She has not surrounded herself with those people. And she's had some notable, I think she has said some really smart things from time to time and made some really good statements, but she's had this tendency to bounce from being very thoughtful and showing herself to be thoughtful, such as, the Kavanaugh hearing. Last week when the Fed Reserve chairman was testifying, when she's asking questions about policy, but then she will quickly say something just ridiculous or offensive and then, starts taking criticism. So she isn't able to kind of moderate herself well. And I think that until she can moderate herself and what she says and be much more deliberate about what she says and how she says it, that she's going to continue to have this, back and forth kind of bouncing from being praised to, being criticized.
Is it fair to say Nancy Pelosi is the most celebrated and decorated and effective woman legislator in the history of the United States?
I think perhaps so. I mean, if you consider just from the standpoint of her leadership role, because there's nobody who's had, that level of leadership like she has at all, much less as long as she has. And I think, and no one can question that she is extremely smart, extremely savvy, and she's respected by everybody, even those who disagree with her completely on policy.
We could argue that point, but I'm not made to look foolish by saying that.
Right.
So if that's
and it would be a mistake for anybody, let alone someone in your own caucus to go up against you and that way.
Why would you choose to
pick a fight,
challenge her, and then throw the race card out instead of learning from her?
The other thing is that Pelosi, if you're a freshman or a backbencher, she can make your life miserable. I mean, pretty
she already said she put me on all these committees just to keep me busy. Well, isn't that kind of what a freshman congressman's supposed to do?
That's par for the course as you come in for
It's
freshman.
like I joined a big company at 28, strutted in and said, well, you've given me all these tasks to do just to keep me out of the board meeting because y'all just don't want to hear my brilliant ideas.
Right. Yeah, it's this idea that somehow I should be, committee chair on day one, or, I should have, all of this, experience in this type of leadership. And so that's her mistake. And there's the tactic has always been that you get in there, you work hard, but quietly, you work your way up to, committee chairmanships, to heading up different caucuses within your party, and then to getting leadership roles, whether that be, minority leader, whip, those types of roles. And again, that's the world Nancy Pelosi knows, because that's how Nancy Pelosi came up through the ranks. She was her party's whip at one point. She's held almost every leadership role prior to becoming speaker. And so, again, you see it from the standpoint of you have to put your dues in. You can't expect...
You have to learn the job.
Right.
If you, who have been worked on the Hill, have experienced that, if you won a congressional seat tomorrow, you would still walk in with a curve.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
If you've never done that job before, there is a learning curve to it. It is natural to expect you have to learn that.
Well, and you have to have a certain level of humility to go along with that. I mean, if you have to know that there's a learning curve and you have to be humble about it. If you have no humility and you come in walking in like, I'm, the best, gift.
The cat's ass.
Right. You're going to run afoul of your colleagues and the leadership, and you're not going to make very many friends. And it's hard to be effective legislatively and to get policy achievements if you don't have friends in your own caucus and you're not as well regarded and you're seen as this lightning rod who, is just unpredictable. And I think that's where AOC is struggling right now, is that, her moderate colleagues have no inclination to work with her at all based on...
After that comment she made about Pelosi and her chief of staff, wouldn't trust her as far as I can throw her.
Yeah, not at all. Why would you?
Your crosshairs and be the subject of your Twitter rant or your pop-off.
Right.
So I already insulted young people. I might as well go ahead and throw a couple out. I'll throw this one out at women at this point. I was shocked that the sisterhood didn't coalesce around Hillary and say, yes, I understand she has some things maybe that I'm not comfortable with, but as a woman, it is important for me to be part of electing the first female president. I've asked my wife, women at work, women that are friends. Nobody has quite explained to me why that didn't happen. There seems to be, again, women in power have this weird competitiveness with each other that's different than men in power. Men tend to be more aggressive, more straightforward aggressive, more verbally aggressive, more physically aggressive. Women have this weird, and I don't know the right word, but it's this weird kind of sideways angle they take at each other that sometimes prevents them from promoting each other, prevents them from really helping each other get to where they ultimately want to be.
Oh, I agreed. And I've had women colleagues in different work environments that I've been in who have told that story in corporate America and how that's been the case, to where women supervisors and bosses have felt threatened by other women to the extent they have it by other men. And so you have that. And so I don't know, that would be an interesting aspect of the 2016 election to study, is the psyche of American women voters and what turned them off about Hillary. And I don't know if there's been any big major study done or surveying, but that would be, I think, very compelling. But it also speaks to the fact that Hillary was so disliked to where, I mean, even the, once in a lifetime, shattering the glass ceiling moment of her candidacy, even that wasn't enough with women to carry her over.
As a dude, too, don't you walk into most business and professional settings and you make a mental inventory of who's in the room, who I can challenge, and who I ain't picking a fight with?
Right.
It's like that person, yes, that person, yes, that person, no. I ain't. And if I want to yell at that person, I'll yell at this person and just let them hear me do it so my point gets across.
Yeah, their strategy. Yeah.
And I don't know what the strategy for AOC is here. What's the upside?
Yeah, I don't see it. I mean, she's going to limit herself in a leadership capacity. I mean, she may be able to parlay this with like the net roots and like fundraising.
Yeah.
And I think if she may see herself in a role where she can influence primaries and
but
go
she's got
on
that
speaking
district
gigs.
and that seat as long as she wants it.
Yeah.
She could be there 50 years.
Oh, yeah.
She won't, because I think she sees herself much different than just a congressperson. I would be stunned if sometime in the next 10 to 15 years she's not running for Senate or president.
Oh, yeah. I would see her running for Senate.
Yeah.
And actually probably much more quickly than many would expect, because I think she is kind of on fast track.
That. In 15 years, I see her dropping out of Congress because she understands the amount of money she can make as a speaker, an author, and as a personality than she can being in Congress.
And in some ways probably have way more influence on progressive politics on the
massively
outside.
Could be true.
Yeah.
Let's talk about somebody who's not really a fan of progressive politics right now, Joe Biden.
Yes.
We're trying to segue to Uncle Joe. Last time we were here, he had a horrible debate performance. We both said, a 5-point slide in the poll, that might be too much. Yes, it was bad, but it wasn't fatal.
Right.
I think he's lost those 5 points nationally.
He has, because he was sitting like 33, 34. He's at 27, 26 now in the polls. He still has a lead over Harris, but it's much less. I think it's high single digits or mid to high single digits now, depending on which national poll you look at. So clearly a problem for him. That was not a good debate performance. And in fact, when Democratic voters, I can't remember if this was a poll of progressives in particular, it was all Democrats, but on one of the polls he was like 4th or 5th in terms of ranking, in terms of how Democratic voters saw performance of everybody on stage.
Yeah.
But
there's no way anybody could have rated that other than
the saving
poor.
grace is it is still very early. There are still so many candidates in the race. And, we'd like to focus a lot of attention on these national polls. The polls that matter are the polls in the early battleground states, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina.
Yeah.
If you look at, you can go back to 2008. At this point in time, Giuliani and Hillary were leading their respective primary polling, national polling, by 20 points or so. So again, take it with a grain of salt. Those early battlegrounds matter a lot. We did have one candidate drop out. Eric Swalwell dropped out.
Thank God.
Finally won. We need more. But then we had Steyer get into the race from California, the environmental activist billionaire.
For what purpose?
Yeah, Tom Steyer.
That's
at this
all
late,
we need is another butthole billionaire who can finance a campaign to bleed 2% off Democrats through the north or through the blue wall, basically,
right.
and tip this election. Steyer, thank you once again for playing the role of asshole, because that's what you're doing right now. We flushed the first doofus out, the Starbucks guy,
right.
only to be replaced by this guy.
There you go. The key difference, though, is this guy's running the Democratic primary, not as a independent, so that's not going to be a threat.
But he'll pivot out of this to. I have a feeling he will pivot out of the Democratic primary when he's not invited to anything on the stage. He doesn't pull for shit, and he'll do another kind of independent run and go from there. What's weird is that in some ways it feels like this is now a 3-person race. Can Biden hold off Harris and Warren?
Yeah.
Warren's made steady progress.
She has. She's continued to rise.
Kamala Harris had a rock star moment. Weird, though, because 24 to 48 hours, she basically retracted everything she said in the debate on Biden. But I think we're learning that's just Kamala Harris.
That's what she does.
That's just what she is.
See healthcare as an example.
Yes.
Yeah.
See busing.
Right.
Which now we come out with her position basically is exactly what Biden's position was.
Yeah.
Can he hold those two off through Super Tuesday, collect the majority of the majority of wins on Super Tuesday, and shut it down? And it still kind of feels like he can.
I think he can. I don't think it's a certainty, but I think it looks like he can. Yeah. Next debates will be critical. He has to up his game. He has to look like he's, energized, ready to roll, that he's not calling it in. And then I think what will also be critical is, no more gaffes. He has to have prepared answers on everything, not wobble at all, not be caught off guard.
I kind of look at it this way. It couldn't be any worse.
Yeah.
Unless he walks on stage drunk and moons the crowd, he can't turn in any more of a bad performance than he did. Also, too, he's not just going to sit there and let Harris punch him in the face again.
That's not going to happen.
And I don't think Warren's style isn't the attack dog that Harris is.
No, I don't see Warren going after Biden either in that way, because again, that's just not the way Warren is. I
mean, they could 1-2 punch him where she attacks him at the narrative and the emotional level, and then Warren hits him at the policy level.
I was going to say that, yes. Because again, Harris has, resonates emotionally, has, is very appealing. She has the rhetorical, skills, and so she can come at it that way. And then Warren can add the policy angle. So, and that's where Biden has to watch out for, and basically be able to pivot back to a platform of someone who has experience, who's centrist, who can win, steady ship, that we don't need to go off the rails. Policy is great, but you have to get there first, and if you can't get there, policy doesn't matter.
And Biden made some weird gaffe this week where some guy was pushing him on, would you commit to releasing over 50% of incarcerated individuals in the United States? And he's like, I think we can do over 50. And it's like, what are you talking about?
Oh, I missed that.
I mean, I hate to say this, folks. And again, I don't think I'm saying anything shocking or provocative, but there's a lot of people in jail that deserve to be in jail.
They're in jail for a reason, yeah. You don't just blanket say you're going to release.
That's correct. There's a lot of people in jail, more than the 50%, that are violent offenders.
Right.
What is he talking about?
That's very different from sentencing reform. To go from sentencing reform to say you're going to just mass release so many inmates.
Is it 60%? Is it 70%? I have no doubt that there are people in jail who shouldn't be there.
Oh, absolutely.
There is no doubt there are communities in this country that are policed different because of their racial and their economic makeup.
We have people that are serving long sentences for low-level drug offenses who should not be there.
But letting out a low-level drug possessor out of a 5 to 7 year sentence is very different than letting out a drug trafficker.
Exactly.
And you don't get to releasing half the people from prison on low-level, non-violent offenses.
You end up letting out people who are dangerous and who are violent in that regard. So there's no way.
I got to find a book to read on this, but America in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was a fairly violent place.
Oh, absolutely.
And as much shit as Biden's getting over the 94 criminal justice reform law, there is no doubt, and there is a large pool of evidence that it worked.
Yeah.
And America is the safest it's ever been, in some ways, because we do lock up a lot of people.
Violent crime overall is down.
Way down.
It was much higher in the early 90s. It had peaks as well, as you noted, in the late 60s, in the early to mid 70s. So, and especially in the urban centers of the United States. New York City used to have a sky-high murder rate. Their homicide rate now is the lowest ever. In fact, for the first time this year, no, it was last year. For first time last year, London's homicide rates surpassed New York City, and that had never happened before.
Absolutely. Two things can be true at once.
Yeah.
And that's where, again, if you just take this woke progressive position, you are not appealing to the centrist blue wall Midwesterner that you have to have. No. And I think that's where Biden has to quit making those type of unforced errors that open the crack up to people. That is he going to be a centrist, or is he going to yield to the progressive wing?
Right. People have to be confident, know that he's going to be a centrist, that he's going to be kind of thoughtful, stable, that he's not going to fluctuate. His views aren't going to ebb and flow with whatever's the flavor of the day. Because I think that is the weakness that most of his opponents have, is they have gone back and forth and changed positions so many times. Yeah. And so he has an opportunity to be the antithesis of that.
Absolutely. You are watching Chernobyl, right? Or did you finish it?
I just started it. I've watched one episode.
I thought like 3 weeks ago you started watching
it.
No,
remember, because we had this discussion and then you were like so disappointed. You said you were going to stop asking me because I hadn't started it yet. I'm starting it now, so yes.
So will you commit by next week's podcast you will have it all consumed?
It's just 5 episodes, right?
6.
Okay. I think I can do that.
Okay.
I can do that, yeah.
Do I need to launch into the come on, Brandon, you're a single dude, you could watch it all tonight as a married man with children?
I think you launched into that last time.
Watch television.
No,
Brandon, I have to make a choice to actively ignore my family to watch TV. And by the way, I watch.
Is that so hard to do, though?
I watch a lot of TV.
No, I will do that this next week and get that done. I did want to do a shout out if any of you did get to read. Justin Amash left the Republican Party. He had a really interesting op-ed that appeared on July 4th. Go back and read it. The one phrase that stuck out at me that keeps reverberating in my head is political death spiral. He described where we are as a political death spiral. I think that is very valid, and the imagery that evokes. But it's just another example of how people are getting disenchanted with the two-party system, but especially with the direction the Republican Party has gone. And
again, the president just called him a complete loser. He was going to lose anyway, and blah, blah, blah. So that's just typical. All right, that's our hour. Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Craig.